Hello everyone, and welcome to the setup video of the services dashboard application. Uh, so I've created a new Google Cloud project, and I also recommend you do this step as well. And now what we are going to do is because services dashboard application uses Firestore as its backend, let's go ahead and into this new fresh project, enable Firestore. So you can also search for Firestore here. So let's just wait for that. So notice that now it mentions that you can go into the native mode or the data store mode, right? And go ahead and choose the native mode, which is what will run it in the Firestore mode basically. Now I'm going to keep the region as Mumbai region, but you can keep the region that you want, and also make sure that App Engine is available in that particular region. So App Engine is available in Mumbai region. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Mumbai region. Okay. Generally, choosing the region which is closest to you would be a good idea. So I'm going to deploy my Firestore also in Mumbai region as well as the App Engine application later in the video. All right, so that is done. So let's go ahead and open the Cloud Shell. Now I'm going to use instructions from this particular blog, and you can find the link to this blog in the description of this video. Now we have two videos that we are demonstrating in this blog. One is the setup video, which we are doing now, and also the demonstration of the functionality of services dashboard. Now, if you want to know what services dashboard is, how does it help you and your organization, and you can go ahead and read this blog. So again, let's go to the setup steps. Yes. So we have this Cloud Shell open now. I'm going to go ahead and run the setup steps now. Okay. Next up is CD. All right. So now first we run the application in the setup mode, and later we switch to the actual production mode. So make sure you run this particular command. Go ahead and authorize. All right. So let me run that command once more. Okay. So now notice that because this is the first time I'm running App Engine also in this particular project, it's going to ask me which region I want my App Engine application to be in. I'm going to choose Asia South one, but again, you can choose the one that fits you the best, right? So I'm going to choose option 6 here, which stands for Mumbai region. Go ahead and say yes. Now this might take a few minutes, so I'm going to come back once this setup is basically done. So this took a few minutes, but we have our application ready now. So let's go ahead and browse that. So notice that the application opens and there are no services now, there is no data, but there is also a warning saying running it in a setup run configuration. So basically you should run this only behind an identity aware proxy. We talk about that in this post as well. But For the first run, we run it in a setup run configuration so that you can update the required settings that the application requires. So for that, go ahead into application and update the application settings. Now, I have explained what these settings are and what they actually do, right? You can go into the post and take a look at those settings information as to what each of those setting actually does, right? And so let's go ahead and update those settings. Now there are some mandatory settings that need to be there. So now let's go ahead and update the settings. There are only two mandatory settings, application name and the data retention days. So I'm going to go ahead and update the application URL. I'm going to also update the SendGrid API key, email, administrative emails. Actually, this is the main setting that we need to update. Rest of it can be updated later, but I'm going to go ahead and update all of these and come back. So at this point, I have updated all the required settings. Just be aware that any setting that gets updated later, it takes about 5 minutes for it to take full effect, right? So what I've done is I've updated the SendGrid API key. This is used to send alert emails. Then the alert from email, this is the email that is set on the SendGrid account. Again, you don't have to set up this information if you don't want to get alerts or if you don't want to send alerts to your customers, but it is highly recommended. Then administrative email is a comma separated list of users that have access to add services, update their status, and so on. Non-administrative users, which are going to be your customers, are only going to get access to the dashboard as well as the help screen and nothing else. And this inbound API key is if you want to set up, so generally, and you can see that in the functionality demo, where the services can be updated manually or they can be updated using an API endpoint, right? So for that, this inbound API key will be required. But if you don't want to set that up, this is an optional setting. And to come up with an inbound API key, what I've done is I've just went to a random hex number generator and got a hex number and just put SD dot that number, right? So I'm going to go ahead and update the settings now. So settings are updated successfully. Now let's go ahead and check what are the next steps. So it says optional if you plan to use API endpoint for updating the service statuses, right? Now, in this case, because I want to show this functionality, I'm going to go ahead and deploy this API endpoint as well, but again, it is optional. So go back to here and I'm going to go ahead and deploy this API as well. Again, this is optional and you can read about this in more details in the post as to what exactly it ends up doing, right? So now while this API endpoint is getting deployed, again, this is an optional step, right? We can do the rest of the mandatory steps that we have to do, right? Now let's look at what those steps are. Now the first step is basically to enable the identity aware proxy, right? So you can search here for the identity aware proxy, right? And go ahead and enable that. So you can search for it, or because I've already searched for it before, it's there in the recent searches, right? So you can search for identity aware proxy, right? Should come here. So go ahead and enable the API. Go to identity aware proxy. At this point, it's going to ask you to configure the consent screen. So go ahead and click that. I'm going to choose external, create. I'm going to call the app to be services dashboard, and I'm going to choose the email. Now we don't want to fill anything up on this particular up screen because that requires application verification. So make sure you don't upload the app logo. Now just add the developer contact information. Save and continue. Save and continue on the next screen. Save and continue on the next screen. And that's pretty much it. To dashboard, this will take you back to the identity, the OAuth consent screen. Now you can close this tab, and let's look at what happened to our what happened to our API endpoint. So seems like that is also deployed. So now if we go into the app engine, we should find two services running. I'm going to go into the new tab here. Go to services. So notice that we have the default service, which is the UI and the API. And we also have a separate API. And again, you can read about that. And this is totally an optional deployment. Now, what's next that we have to do is we have to actually redeploy our main application or main service. This is because we want to get out of this setup mode, right, which we were running in. So let's go ahead and do that. So the instructions for that is just gcloud app deploy app.yaml. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And yes. So I'm going to come back once this setup is done. So notice that the redeployment actually went through. So now at this point in time, we have deployed the application in the production mode and not the setup mode. So what we can do now is go ahead to the identity. So I'm going to minimize this, refresh the identity aware proxy screen. Go ahead and refresh that. Now we want to put our application, which is to say both the services, behind the identity aware proxy. So notice that initially it shows you an error, but go ahead and enable this toggle, turn on. Now what we want to do is for our UI and the entire application, we want to provide the access to all authenticated users, and the administrative access will be managed by the application itself. So all Google accounts who are authenticated will get access to this default service, which is our UI and the API. So select that. And add a principal here. So first assign the role of Cloud IAP secured web app user. And here go ahead and say all authenticated users. Go ahead and save that, allow public access. So this is not really a true public access because this is going to be for only the Google authenticated users, right? And the reason for that is you have to share your application with your customers so that they can take a look at the status of your services. And now this dashboard service API is the next one. So for this, we want to give access to all users. The reason for that is you want to allow the existing tooling to update your services, right? Now again, this is optional. If you don't want the existing tooling to update and you always want your administrators to manually update the service statuses, you don't even have to deploy this and carry with this particular step, right? But I'm going to go ahead and add a principal for this one, and I'm going to say all users and select the role as that of a cloud IP secured web app user. Again, go ahead and save. Yes. Again, make sure that to the default service you provide all authenticated users, and make sure that you provide to dashboard service API, if you end up deploying it, the all users, right? So now let's see how this application looks from an administrative user that we had added in the admin emails earlier, and from basically a standard Google user, right? So let's go back to our app engines. And let's go and copy the link address. We already had it open here. I'm going to close that and paste it here. So notice that now, earlier it just opened. Now it is asking me to log in with a particular user, right? So I'm going to go ahead and log in with a user who I added as an administrator earlier. So there you go. So now notice that for the administrative user, I get all the options, right? And for a non-administrative user, which we are going to see next, we are only going to get the dashboard shown on the home and the help option, right? Now, also remember that we are not going to cover anything beyond setup in this particular video. We have a separate functionality demo which is also there in this blog post, right? So once the setup is ready, you can actually go and check that. There we exercise most of the functionality of the application. All right, so before we go there, let's go ahead and look at how does the application look to a non-administrative user. Go ahead and paste. So here I've logged in as a different user. I'm going to go ahead and log in as a non-administrative user. So notice that here the number of options shown are only home and help screen and nothing else. So that pretty much completes our setup. Just to summarize, what we have done is from this particular post, we first had created a new project. We also enabled Firestore in it. We chose a region which was closest to us, went ahead and cloned the repository, went ahead and deployed the application in the setup mode, went to the application settings, updated the administrative email and other settings if needed. Then we also deployed the API. Again, this is optional if you don't want the API, and do read about this API as to what it does or what it enables you and your organization to do, right? And then we redeployed the application, but also before that, we enabled the identity aware proxy. We had to create a consent screen for that. Make sure you just choose the options that are shown as part of this video. All right, so now go ahead and check out the functionality demo where we are going to show the functionality of this application from an administrative user's perspective as well as from a customer's or a non-administrative perspective as well. All right. Thank you very much, and happy cloud computing, everybody.